I've been hesitant about making this video because I feel silly, even though it's retroactive feeling silly for when I was a kid.
He's unbothered.
What's up, everybody? Ty Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. Before we get started, I'm just going to ask that you like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to comment to help me on the algorithm, but you don't know what to comment, just put a knife. Because if there was ever one that they're going to come for my neck on, it is most definitely this one. All over the news, you notice that they're talking about the medical transitioning of minors. And I wanted to take a second to talk about that because I think that this one I probably have a different perspective on than most people that say that they're firmly against it, because I'm very much against this. And I know that the tendency from my own community, which would be
To us LGBTQIA+ community,
would be just to dismiss me and say that I'm hating and that I don't care about trans kids, and nothing could be further from the truth. Technically, I know what a lot of these kids are going through, because when I was a young kid, I grew up in small town Arizona. Growing up, we really weren't allowed to have a lot of friends that were outside of our families. So my sister was my best friend, and we always hung out together. We always played together. And one of my first memories was my sister telling me, boys are supposed to like girls and girls are supposed to like boys. And if you're a boy and you don't like girls, then you must be a girl. And if you're a girl and you don't like boys, then you must be a boy. So in my kid brain, even though I was young enough that I wasn't actually having sexual feelings, because I honestly want to say, and I'm not exaggerating at all, I had to be 4 or 5 years old. And the way that I remember that was because where we were living when it happened. And I remember it made such an impression on me, but I also had a lot of traumatic events when I was a young kid that made it so I was making memories before you should technically be making memories. I had a very traumatic childhood in a lot of ways. Not my parents' fault, but just life is what it is. So I just remember my sister telling me that, and me already knowing that I liked boys. And I didn't know anything about what sex was or sexual orientation. When I was growing up, this was in the early 80s, so it wasn't like we were seeing gay people on TV or the news. The internet wasn't a thing. Nothing like now, where I could have been heavily influenced. I just knew that I liked boys. So this led to me really feeling for my entire childhood like I must be a girl. And the reason that I say that I feel silly about that is because I am very comfortable with the fact that I'm a man. I don't struggle with that even a little bit. And I don't care when people misgender me. It's something that happens all the time when people are trying to insult me. And then sometimes people that watch my content on any form of social media will innocently assume that I'm a trans man. So they assume that I was born female and transitioned to being what I am today. But I was born male and I love being a man. But it's, to me, a little bit embarrassing that I was so gullible that I believed that. And I know my sister wasn't at all trying to prank me or make me feel silly. I know she wasn't directing it at me. She was only 3 years older than I was. And it's just something that stuck with me until I was about 16. So that entire time in my head, I would picture myself in a female form. I would picture what I was going to be. It was almost like I was manifesting it or envisioning it almost all the time. Most of my thoughts, I remember them being like, what am I going to do when I'm a girl? And what kind of person am I going to carry? And there were girls that I really liked looking at and liked their style and thinking that that's what I was going to be like. And now when I think about that, it's usually only in my private thoughts. And this is one of the few times that I've really gone into it, even though for anybody that might think that I'm just saying this because it's a popular thing in the news right now, if you were to go back to 2018, that was the first time that I talked about this on a YouTube video. I think it was on National Coming Out Day. I'm not going to link it below because I don't like the way that my hair looked in that video. video, but that was the first time I ever talked about this, which was obviously before what we're going through now. But this is the first time I'm really going into it the way that I am, as far as what I actually saw in my mind and the way that I pictured myself and the way that I pictured my future. It wasn't until I moved to Phoenix, because growing up in smaller town Arizona, there were no gay people around me other than a few creeps everybody in town would make fun of, or a few kids that really got bullied and didn't look like they had good lives at all. And for me, I didn't think being gay would ever be an option. Like, it just always seemed like an insult from the kids, because when I was younger, I was more effeminate, and then I learned to mask that and put on a better masculine facade, and that's about where eventually I stayed. But it wasn't from adopting that facade, it really was from growing into that being my life and that being what I am. And now it's not something I think about. It's actually kind of weird to me now, when if you look at my comments on any platform, you'll notice that there's always people saying that I am a masculine gay man. And I know not everybody thinks that, but when people say that in my comments, I'm always like, where do these people get the idea that I'm masculine? But then when I think about it objectively, I know that that's just because I know exactly how gay I am. And I also know the feminine thoughts that I have, as well as the masculine traits that I exhibit. And I have no problem reconciling those two in my own brain at all. I would say that I'm pretty well integrated, and I don't mind shifting between the two. I've also talked about how I could technically be considered bigendered, which is a term from the madness that they've come up with. But I would not choose to go by bigendered or non-binary, because to me, almost everybody can fall into those two categories. Because when it comes to non-binary specifically, if you do things that aren't traditionally associated with your gender or your sex, be it male or female, that would be considered non-binary, even though most of us do that pretty seamlessly throughout a day. If you're a woman and you take out the trash, you're doing boy chores. So if you wanted to, you could say you're non-binary because you're going against your gender. If you're a tomboy type, girls are being told that if they're a tomboy that they're transgender, and that's not always the case. Actually, a lot of people grow out of it, like I did, because there's nothing to stop me at this point. If I wanted to be a woman, I could be a woman, but I really have no interest at all in messing with my gender. And there was a point when I was younger, when I first came out, that I would a lot of times wear skirts, and I played around with gender a bit, but I never identified as anything other than a man once I knew it was an option for me to just be gay. Because, you know, shortly after I moved to Phoenix, I right away knew that gay was an option. And once I found that out, in my head, I was like, so now it's just getting from this to being that. And I didn't know exactly what the road was going to be, from me being closeted and hanging out with the people that I hung out with to actually being a gay man, but I knew that that's where I was headed. So that's the reason that I'm so firmly against the medicalization of young people. Now, if you say that you want to allow kids to socially transition, which, if you don't know what social transition is, that's basically when you just let somebody dress in the clothes of the other gender and also give them the pronouns. And understand that I would never tell somebody how to parent. But what I would say, as a person that's gone through this kind of thing, is if my parents had given me resistance, because I grew up in a generation where I knew not to ever express this to my parents because they would have thought I was crazy. I don't know what the course of action would have been, but I know they definitely would have thought I was crazy just because of the generation that I grew up in. But if I had told them and they had given me actual resistance, that would more than likely bring out the rebellion in me and make me feel like I should double down and really lean into that and maybe take steps that I otherwise wouldn't have taken. Or if you look at the way things played out, I definitely would not have taken, because that turned out not to be who I was. So in a way, getting to run through that in my brain and fully living that in my head for all those years. And it was several years, because if you think about when I was 4 or 5 until I was 16, so that's like a good 10 or 11 years, depending on when exactly that transition happened in my brain, where I realized, oh, I can just be gay. It was a huge relief, because in my head at that point, once I had reached 15, 16, of course, I read magazines and had been exposed to different things and knew the term sex change. And in my head, I remember that as a kid thinking, I'm gonna have to go through a sex change and they're gonna have to change the way I look. Like, that much I knew. And so don't give any resistance would be my advice. And I have had parents ask me this before, and if you ask my honest advice, I'll give you an honest answer. I don't get in the way. I wouldn't speak to anybody's children. That's not my place. But if a parent asks me what I think because they feel like I might be able to offer some insight, what I would say is allow a social transition. Let them dress however they want to dress. Refer to them in the pronouns that they want to be referred to as long as they're not being miserable with you and really putting you through it, as long as you're letting them know, hey, this is something I'm doing to respect what it is you want, but don't get abusive about it. Because that's one of the biggest problems right now with young people and trans identity, is they really feel like it's a license to be just a complete asshole to everybody around them. And that's not something I agree with, no matter what you are. So that's a caveat that parents should throw in, is you're going to be cool about this. We're not going to have a situation where you now run the house and we're supposed to all bow down to you because you're trans. We're just respecting that you identify this way and seeing where it goes. But I've had trans friends for the last 30 years. So also I caution against medicalization at too early of an age or before the age of 18, because you want to allow your body to develop, even if eventually you decide that you are meant to transition, because then you have the necessary equipment where you can live it to its maximum potential. So if you don't know anything about that, I'll put a couple links down below. There are a couple creators that I really feel talk about this in a way that could be very helpful to not only parents but kids that may think they're trans, or kids that may be wondering what the reality of it is. And like I said, I would not recommend this to anybody's kids, and my stuff is clearly marked on YouTube as not being for kids. Like when you upload videos, my stuff is marked for only adults. And so what it happens is, in these situations, is that once you start the medicalization process, that's something that's kind of irreversible. And you'll hear different things on the internet, but it is definitely a situation where once you start down a path, you're going to be medicalized to some degree for the rest of your life. And I don't know about anybody else, but even outside of the dysphoria, I guess technically would be what it would be considered, I have changed so much, and the things that I want changed so much since I was younger. So I wouldn't want to be living with the consequences for the rest of my life that 16-year-old me was deciding, or even I've made mistakes in my 20s that I wish I hadn't made and I had to live with forever. And we'll talk about that one day too. But when you consider that there are certain things that you need, like if you start taking puberty blockers and you're a young boy, you're going to end up with a micro penis. And I'm not talking about having a micro penis from a vanity perspective, but if you have a micro penis and then you want to get a vagina because you figure out that you are in fact a trans woman, when they do the surgery to create the vagina, that's usually a penile inversion. They basically turn your penis inside out. So however long your penis is how deep your vagina is going to be. So you'll need that so that you'll have the necessary tissue to create the vagina that you're going to want at that point. But then it's also important to remember, you wouldn't let somebody invade your privacy by changing her outfit outside on the porch. So why would you let somebody invade your internet privacy by browsing the web without a VPN? When you go online without one, internet service providers can see every site you visit, and they can legally sell this information to ad companies. companies. Browse the web securely with ExpressVPN and stop getting those annoying targeted ads. Your data will even be encrypted for maximum protection, and it works on all your devices, even routers. I first got introduced to ExpressVPN when I had to perform in China for 15 days. And if you aren't familiar with the Great Firewall, it is a very real thing. So that means no access to Facebook, Instagram, Netflix, YouTube, stalking your exes. It's all off the table. And let me tell you, if you feel bored, isolated, lonely, and like a loser just in your regular life, imagine when you're on the other side of the world and that's the way you feel. It is outright depressing. And that's when a friend of mine introduced me to ExpressVPN. And we were back in business, back on YouTube, back on Netflix, back on Insta, and back to stalking your ex. Life was great again. Kinda, because it was still China. But whatever. It's easy to get started. Just download the app, click one button, and get protected. Secure your online activity by visiting expressvpn.com/Thai today. That's expressvpn.com/Thai. And you can get an extra 3 months free. expressvpn.com/Thai. That a lot of people, once they see the way their body develops, they start to notice that there are things that they like about their bodies and there are things that they don't necessarily want to change. I have several trans women friends that have decided that they never want to get the bottom surgery. They have breast implants. They have, in some cases, very nice breasts, but they have no interest in getting rid of their penis. They have no interest in getting a vagina. And that has been explained to me by them as being for two different reasons. One, that surgery hasn't quite been perfected. There can be a lot of complications, which there is a creator by the name of Shapeshifter that did an interview with Blaire White.
I 100% feel like I was part of some cruel medical and social experiment. I wish somebody hugged me a few years back and be like, you know what, you can present feminine, you can wear heels, hair, whatever you want, but the sad reality, we don't have technology to make you an actual woman.
I'll include that in the description so that you can watch it if you want to. I'll also include links to Buck Angel, who is a female to male transsexual that talks a lot about what he's gone through as far as the way that his body has reacted and his vagina specifically had reacted to him being on testosterone for so long.
Testosterone actually thins out the walls of the uterus, of the cervix, of the vaginal walls. I almost died from atrophy. I don't know how I can yell this bigger to the community. It's not a joke. And once you get atrophy, you're totally screwed on some level.
There's a few, and I'll put them down below just as resources for anybody that wants to hear a bit about that. But there have been some nightmare situations and nightmare complications. Even though we're in 2023, it hasn't necessarily been perfected. So with so many different potential consequences out there, it really is something that you want to give a lot of thought to. So that's one reason that the trans women I know don't want to have the bottom surgery. But then there's also the fact that there are men that specifically do like trans women. So if you get rid of your penis, now you're no longer going to be attractive to the men that are going to be the most attracted to you in your full form and accept you for what you are. And that's not a reason to not do anything, is because of what other people think. But also at the same time, straight men and straight society aren't necessarily the most open to accepting you as what you now would technically be, even if you do get the bottom surgery and have a man-made vagina. So now you've done something to your body that possibly caused you to lose sexual sensation, and you might be dealing with other consequences, as well as a nightmare of actually having to heal your vagina, which is an open wound. And I'm not exaggerating or being mean when I say that. It's just what it is.
What they don't really tell you is that the body treats you as a wound.
It tries to close up.
Yes, constantly trying to close up.
So now you're going through all of this, and society still doesn't accept you as being that particular thing. And maybe you could have been just as happy or even happier if you had left your body the way that it was. Then sometimes just on a purely superficial level, there might be certain things that you like about your body and reasons that you wouldn't want to change it. I know trans women from both camps. I know trans women that completely do not want anybody to ever pay attention to their penis and really feel like it's a source of shame for them. And then I know trans women that actually like their penises a lot and really do like the sexual options that they have available to them, since they're, as they put it in some cases, a woman with something extra. And then when it comes to the trans men that I know, there's one trans man in particular that I know personally that has never chosen to have his top surgery, so never had his breast removed. And that was just because by the time he decided to transition, he had fully developed into his female body. And when he started taking the testosterone, he got all the changes he needed as far as being more muscular, also having facial hair, and fully on the outside appearing to be a man. As far as his chest went, he just binds his chest so that you can't see that he has breasts, but he really likes his breast. And that's something we once talked about. It was a podcast episode I did with him. Maybe that I'll include a link for if I can find a link. Look in the description because I might end up having a link for that. But he shared with me that he really does like his breast and he has no interest in getting rid of them. And I know a lot of people wouldn't understand that because they're like, well, if you're trans, wouldn't it seem that you'd want to fully transition? In that way, I have accepted that I don't have to fully understand everything that everybody around me goes through mentally. There are different people that like different things that I could never understand. And that's even in the space of being a biological male or female, some cases heterosexual, where people will choose to be in, say, polyamorous relationships, or some people like different types of body modification that makes no sense to me. Also me, I have a bunch of piercings and tattoos. Some people don't think any of that is attractive or don't understand why a person would choose to do that. So in that way, I just go with the it takes all types kind of mentality, and I really don't feel like I have to fully understand what anybody else is going through. Also, the reason that I'm so firmly against young people medically transitioning is right now the LGBT community, more specifically the trans community, is not allowing us to have the data that we actually need when it comes to detransitioners. If you're not familiar with what a detransitioner is, that's a person that has started down the road of transitioning and then decided it wasn't for them and took steps to reverse the process as much as they possibly could.
So every time I went to consults and entered my history, my information, none of those people are studying like detransitioners. So when trans community says regret rate is 1% and complication rate is 1%, that's bullshit.
It is bullshit.
And you guys need to hear this.
In a lot of cases, these people are completely excommunicated from the LGBT community and seen as traitors or the enemy, and their voices are in a lot of cases suppressed. Which, to me, if trans people and trans activists really wanted to make their case and really wanted people to side with them on this particular issue when it comes to allowing young people to transition, they would allow those voices to be heard, because we really need that information to see what, in a lot of cases, is the outcome when it comes to young people transitioning and whether or not that usually turns out to be in the young person's best interest. Also, when you hear about a lot of anti-trans legislation when it comes to trans kids specifically, what's considered anti-trans legislation is holding the doctors that are prescribing the medications and doing the surgeries accountable if the child decides after they grow up or after several years that didn't turn out to be the best course of action. Well, in that case, it's seen as a deterrent to the doctor that there could be any kind of consequence as far as lawsuit, anything like that. And I think that really, if we're going to be transitioning kids and the doctors feel like they're that sure that this is the correct course of action, the correct treatment, gender affirming, life-saving is terminology that they use at different points too, then I feel like you should be willing to put your money where your mouth is. These trans kids that are going to grow up to be adults that have been medicalized by you should have some sort of recourse to come back and say, hey, you messed me up. My parents parents allowed me to do this because you said this was the best course of action. You did surgeries on me. You prescribed me hormones, puberty blockers. So at the very least, these medical professionals who have taken the Hippocratic Oath should be willing to stand behind the decisions that they have directed not only these children, but also their parents to take to do what was supposedly in the best interest of the child. But since none of the doctors want to do that, I don't feel like that should inspire the most confidence in a lot of people. Also, when you read about these gender clinics or you hear about these gender clinics and you hear that in a lot of cases they're not doing very much in the way of talk therapy or getting to know these young people first, it's in some cases just as simple as they go down to a gender clinic, they say that they feel like the opposite sex or they were born in the wrong body, and then right away they're started down the course to changing their gender or affirming the gender that they now identify as. So with all of the factors that I just mentioned, and I'm sure after I'm done recording this other things will pop in my head, I really do feel at a minimum you should have to wait until you're 18 in order to start a medical transition. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down below in the comments. This has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.